Hey everyone, my name is Dr. Alma Olagues. I'm an assistant professor of psychology at Cal State LA, the founder and director of the Psychology Resource Center. And in this video, I'm going to talk about how to write your personal history statement for graduate school applications. This is going to be most helpful for students that are applying to PhD programs, but this is still really helpful for students that are applying to master's programs because that piece is still going to be the same. I'll highlight a couple of differences that are specific to PhD programs, but generally whenever you see a personal history statement, a personal statement, we're going to be talking about the same thing. So generally the biggest thing that I want to highlight about the personal history statement is how it fits into your application packet. So when you are submitting a graduate application, you're typically including a lot of information, a lot of details about yourself, and a lot of things that are on paper, very similar to a lot of people that are applying. A lot of people that are at the top of their program, at the top of their class, that might have similar numbers that are not unique to you. So your application packet is typically going to include your transcripts or your GPA in your undergraduate or master's program, your GRE scores if needed. Each program is different. Some programs are now asking for GRE scores or bringing those things back. The letters of recommendation, you're typically going to have 3 letters of recommendations, primarily from professors that know you in the classroom, in the research lab, that can speak to your potential to be a graduate student in that field or discipline that you're applying for. PhD programs are going to have a research statement, so a statement that is completely different from your personal statement. I'll talk a little bit about what the difference between these two statements are going to be. A CV, which is outlining your experience, your academic resume, your academic history, maybe honors and awards that you've also received. But your personal statement is really what makes your application unique and what is going to bring all of these things to life. The personal statement is really your story of your academic journey and highlights what you specifically bring to the table. A lot of the other things on paper can be very similar and not going to highlight what is unique to you and what you can bring to that graduate program or that career or that discipline that you're pursuing. Your personal statement can bring all of these pieces together and create a cohesive story that is going to outline what your purpose is for pursuing graduate school. So most programs are going to use a holistic review system so that they can see the applicant as a whole, as opposed to just GPA, just your research experience. You really have to be a strong candidate in all of these areas. This is also super relevant for folks that may not have a super high GPA or a ton of research experience. The personal statement can help fill some of those gaps or explain some of these patterns that can potentially, on paper, not make your application look super strong. But your personal statement is really your opportunity to bring these other things to life so that they can see who you are as a person. This is a typical prompt for a personal history statement. It's very broad. It is asking you to describe your personal background and how that informs your decision to pursue a graduate degree. Super broad. Personal background can mean anything, right? Keeping in mind that anything that you are talking about, anything in your personal background that you are telling in your story should be relevant to your pursuit of a graduate degree. Pursuing a graduate degree is the most important piece and the logical next step for your application. So anything that you talk about is going to be useful in giving them a background of giving them a history of your background. But if it's not relevant to your goal or to your pursuit, then maybe that's not the best story to tell. So keep that in mind as you are framing your story. How do these stories, how do this narrative inform your pursuit of a graduate degree? This is a helpful Venn diagram that I like to show students that compares how a personal statement is different than a research statement. This is most relevant for students that are applying to a PhD program because you're almost always going to have two. Some programs have one statement, so this is also a opportunity for you to start looking at the requirements for the individual programs that you are applying to, so that you can see if you have two, if you have one, and if you do have those two, what are the specific guidelines? What is the specific prompt, and what are the things that you are addressing? I'm going to talk about general patterns that typically applies to most applications, but again, each program is different. Each program is different. So the research statement or the statement of purpose or statement of intent is typically focusing on your research skills. This is who are you inside of the lab? You will talk about a couple of things that will highlight your previous research experience and your skills. In this statement, the most important thing to describe is what have I done to prepare me to conduct research at a PhD level. Anytime that you are applying to a PhD, know that that degree is focused on research. Your ability to conduct research, your ability to create novel research ideas, your ability to carry out those projects, your ability to communicate those findings effectively, and to identify what the next steps are, and to write manuscripts. This is what your research statement is selling and what you are presenting to the committee. Do you have the skills necessary to conduct research at the doctoral level? Right? So this is going to include your previous research experience. This is going to detail what projects you have worked on and is designed to help you communicate those findings effectively, help you summarize and synthesize these projects that may be connected, may not be connected. What is the consistency across these projects? What led you to conduct this research? How did you identify the gap? What is the novel contribution, right? And ultimately, what did you find? A lot of folks like to provide the summaries of what they did without providing the findings or jumping into, and then I did this, right? It kind of has to be a full circle for the research experiences that you're describing. You will highlight your research skills. These are the things that I know how to do. I can collect data in person. I can run these analyses. I am familiar with the statistical program. I'm familiar with these data collection methods that are complex, right? I know how to do these things. You're essentially outlining your resume of skills and describing how you have used these skills in the past and what you can potentially contribute to your future research lab. You also describe academic achievements, like academic presentations. You presented these results at these conferences, you presented a talk, maybe you've applied to some grants, anything that highlights your competitiveness as a researcher. So super, super important. This statement is about, is essentially a narrative of your resume or your CV, super skills focused. Now, the personal history statement is who you are outside of the lab. The personal statement is what has motivated you to do all of these things. What were the motivating factors that led you to this research lab? What are the motivating factors that have encouraged you to pursue a graduate degree? This is quite broad, And every personal statement is different for a reason because everyone has their own individual journey. So your statement shouldn't sound like someone else's statement because you have had your own academic journey that you are sharing with other people. Whereas a research statement, that can be quite similar, right? You can imagine that the peers in your lab are going to have a similar research statement. They've worked on similar projects, they might have similar skills. And when you compare that across universities, typically you're going to see a lot more similarities on that end. But your personal statement is completely different. You can talk about educational opportunities that have informed your journey, maybe things that are unique to you that you know help you stand out compared to your peers. Maybe you've had some experiences that helped inform how you think critically about research or the world, right? You can highlight challenges and how you've overcome those challenges. What are the things that helped form your development as a student? You can highlight diversity components. For example, what are the things that you are doing outside of the lab that can help the next generation of students? What are the things that you do outside of the lab that show your dedication to science communication? What are your strengths in terms of your contribution to the science, contribution to the discipline, your field, anything that you think makes you separate from everyone else? And both of these statements should highlight why you are pursuing this specific degree in this discipline, in this program. So I'll talk a little bit about how you can tailor your statements for each university, but both statements are talking about your purpose, why you are pursuing this specific graduate degree, and your personal history statement is what I'm going to talk about in this video. And I wanted to really focus on the differences between the research statement so that if you have both, you know what you are including in the personal history statement versus the research statement. These are some additional prompts or descriptions of what you might address in a personal statement. Anything educational, familial, cultural, economic, social experience that is relevant to your journey. Again, bringing the relevance to your graduate pursuit, bringing why these experiences have shaped your specific journey, your trajectory. What are the things that you have experienced that make you have a perspective that you can contribute that is unique to you, right? What makes you different than other people? Challenges and obligations are something that most people might want to talk about. The most important piece when you are thinking about challenges and obligations or hurdles that you have faced is noting and explicitly addressing how you addressed these challenges, how you overcame the challenges. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later as well. Super, super important that if you are talking about challenges, you are also including how you overcame those challenges so that you can highlight the resiliency rather than the challenge itself. A challenge that most people have also talked about is employment while in undergraduate. This is something that I talked about in my statements as well. If you've self-funded your education, that presents a challenge because it limits your time, right? And it requires a level of commitment to maintain a high GPA. It requires skills that make you better at time management, better at navigating stress. Having to navigate this challenge is going to make you more resourceful, more resilient, and shows that you are still doing very well in your classes, you're still engaged in research, you're still succeeding as a student despite these challenges, right? So how you were able to achieve that and how you were able to maintain your academic rigor and demonstrate that you have maintained this determination is what is going to be most helpful to the committee reviewing, so that you are highlighting that you have faced challenges in the past and that you have a toolbox that you can pull from if something happens again in the future, because grad school is super, super stressful. And if you have experienced stressful experiences, stressful events in the past, have had to navigate difficulties in the past, then and overcame them, then that makes you more likely to be able to face them in the future. This last piece is addressing the diversity component. Given our current political climate, this might be explicit in the prompt that you are being asked to write, or it may not be. The way that you address diversity is helpful to highlight what makes you unique and how you can bring that to the table. But you also want to know and keep in mind that just because if you are a member of an underrepresented group, it doesn't make you automatically more sensitive to the experiences of that same group. And you also want to highlight that you are aware that your membership in this group is relevant to other students that don't necessarily share your identity. So that's something that I will talk about as well. What are the things that make you unique, and what are the things that you can bring to the table beyond I identify as XYZ? Okay, this can be a lot of things, right? This prompt can address a whole range of experiences, and you're either thinking, I have a lot of things to talk about, or I have no idea what I'm going to talk about. To help you refine what your options are, it might be best to start with a timeline. You can make a timeline, you can make an outline that essentially looks like a timeline so that you can generate ideas of what are the things that you might talk about in your statement. The background piece can be, anytime before your undergraduate career. Some folks might start with early childhood experiences. Some folks might start with high school. Some folks may not cover anything in their childhood or anything before their undergraduate career. So it depends. But brainstorming, what are the potential challenges? What are the potential experiences that you want to talk about? And start listing those out and see what comes to mind and what are some colorful narratives that you can imagine or start to illustrate based on these bullet points. You can also think about how these events have influenced your academic journey. It may be super obvious and it may not be, but what you want to focus on and the stories that you want to develop should be relevant to your academic journey and your decision to pursue this specific graduate degree. So maybe something that happened within your freshman year, within your sophomore year, and then more recently. You want to have at least some reference, and it may be in chronological order that you go through in your statement, and sometimes not, right? And it depends in terms of organization, and that's something that you can figure out on your own. But starting to outline potential ideas of some challenges or experiences that you might want to talk about. And then broadly start thinking about how these experiences are connected. So what are some running themes across these elements that you can potentially start with? What might help you determine which stories or events are most important based on the narrative that you create? As you see what your options are, as you start to decide what story you are going to tell, you want to shift your focus to really think about your personal statement becoming a compelling narrative. This is the most important piece that makes your story unique, that makes your story stand out, is that you can make it a story that is going to encourage the committee to want to meet you, to invite you for an interview. You want to stand out from the pile, from the long list of statements that they are reading. If you start your story, or if you tell your story in the same way that 200 other people are, your story is not going to be memorable. You want to find the balance of telling a story that is compelling, that is interesting, that is going to get the reader to read the rest of your statement. There's no guarantee that the committee is going to read all of your statement, that your committee is going to see your entire packet. Statement to be compelling is going to make it more likely that they'll read the entire statement and say, oh, this person is so interesting. Let me look at the rest of the file. What are the things that I want to learn more about based on this specific story that you are telling? Because you are not going to see your story immediately, know that it's going to take time to find the best version of your story. I've seen many different drafts over time, and people change the story that they decide to tell. People change the order of events that they decide to tell, because you have to find what the best version is. So keeping in mind that you're not going to see your story right away. Most folks don't see the story right away, but the earlier you start to refine these pieces by making this outline, by brainstorming the different narratives that you might tell, then you can see what is going to make this most compelling, where you can find the balance between what makes your story memorable and compelling versus sharing too much versus being too generic. You have to find that balance, and every statement is unique. Every statement is different, and you are the best judge of your story. These are some general tips that I encourage students to do and think about as they are writing and revising. After you identify some events or some challenges that you are going to describe in your statement, oftentimes you're going to use general statements or broad statements to describe your perspective, to describe your motivation, and to describe basically why you do what you do, right? These broad statements are considered generic because almost everyone applying to that program can use those statements, can use those sentences in their own statement. For example, almost everyone applying to graduate school is going to say mentoring is important. I value my community. My family and I have struggled financially. Well, maybe not everyone, but a large number of people can say these, right? What makes your statement stand out and unique to you to make it sound less generic is by providing examples. So this is the show versus tell, right? You can tell me mentoring is important, or you can show me by describing how you have implemented this in your academic journey. Provide evidence of how mentoring is important, how you have lived this perspective, how you are carrying this out in your daily life. You can tell me that mentoring is important, but if you tell me about a mentoring experience, something that you have done over a series of months, weeks, or years, something that you take time out of your day to do, something that you go out of your way to do and to find and to apply to, that is going to tell me, oh, this person values mentoring because look at what they're doing. Because everyone can say mentoring is important, but not everyone can say, hey, I've spent all of my Saturdays for the last 3 years at the Boys and Girls Club. Giving me the evidence is more compelling and more convincing than giving me the generic statement. You can tell me that you value your community, But instead, if you show me, if you talk about your volunteering experiences, that is more compelling. So as you're writing, these are some things to think about. Show versus tell. How can I use specific examples of these experiences, of these challenges, and avoid generic statements so that your statement can seem unique to you and your experience and your perspective? Another piece that I want you to keep in mind is to avoid listing grievances. Listing grievances is something that we tend to do when we are talking about our challenges. Once we get on a path to talk about challenges, to talk about things that you've had to overcome, generally we start to list a couple of things that didn't go our way, things that made it harder for us. And it makes sense that we are listing these challenges in this way, listing these obstacles in this way. Because when you ask people, tell me about your academic journey and what was difficult, well, I have a ton of things, right? I didn't have research experience because I was working full time. I was working full time and I was providing for my family. I'm a first gen student, so no one told me about all of these things. So I didn't know that I had to get research experience, right? This is my experience. I work full time. I'm a first gen student, only person in my family to go to school. I thought you just had to get good grades. So during my undergrad, I worked almost full time and I was a part time student so that I can take less classes to really focus on my classes and to have good grades. But I wasn't talking to my instructors. I wasn't in a research lab. I was not ready to apply to our graduate program. And once I started my senior year and started doing some independent research of, okay, what does this graduate application process look like? Then I realized all of these things that were not communicated to me. So I could have gone on and made a list of grievances. These are all the things that I've struggled with. These are the things that I didn't do and things that I didn't know. But that isn't showcasing how you overcame your challenges. That's just a laundry list of things that didn't go your way. And guess what? Graduate school is going to continue to be challenging and it's going to provide obstacles. You have to talk about how you overcame the obstacles so that you can showcase your critical thinking, your resiliency, your ability to persist. You reframe these challenges. How did you overcome? How did you address? How is it that despite these challenges, you're still here? Rather than saying, well, I'm first gen and no one told me, I can say what I actually did is, well, I visited all the office hours for the faculty in the department. I went down a list and I visited every office hour because the only people that were around that had earned a PhD were my instructors. And even if I didn't know them, I showed up to their office hours and I said, hi, my name is so-and-so and I'm interested in doing this. Can I talk to you? Can I ask you some questions about graduate school? And they were happy to help. So I took the initiative. I found a solution to my problem rather than thinking, well, oh, well, too bad, right? You find a solution. And that's what you have to do. You have to be an independent thinker. You have to take control of your academic experience. You have to be resourceful because you are going to continue to face these challenges as a graduate student. So you want to reframe how you've overcome any of the challenges that you were mentioning. It's all about how you phrase it. It's all about how you are able to come out as more resilient and more admirable so that the committee member reading your application is like, wow, this person has done so much. This person has overcome many challenges. This person is super sharp. I want to meet this person. These are some general tips that I want to highlight as you are writing your statement. So as you're brainstorming, as you start writing your first initial draft, these are some things that I encourage students to avoid. For example, providing a detailed medical history of yourself or your family. This is very relevant to a lot of us, right? And especially for folks that are applying to graduate programs in psychology. A lot of the reasons why a lot of us were drawn to this discipline is because it's either our own mental health experiences, our family's mental health experiences. It is a very relevant and real reason why we are here. However, you want to think about your personal statement as an interview packet. You don't want to mention anything that can discourage the committee from believing that you are capable of completing your graduate degree. It's very likely that even if, we're people at the end of the day and we have implicit biases, right? So providing too much information that may not come across as this person is resilient, I trust this person to do it. I can trust that despite the challenges that come their way, despite the stress and pressure that they're going to face in a graduate program, they're going to pull through, because at the end of the day, people want to take folks that are going to finish, right? So anytime any medical history can influence your ability to finish, influence your ability to do well, that can potentially negatively impact your success. Not the case for everybody. And I encourage you to talk to different advisors to think about what their perspective is, and maybe to talk about your specific story and how much you want to share and what is relevant. But that's my perspective, and I'm going to share my perspective based on what I've seen, that it makes it hard. It makes it hard to use this as a narrative of the motivating factor, because it makes it hard for the committee to be able to separate previous challenges versus, well, what is the potential of this person completing the program? The other reason why folks may not use medical history or overly traumatic experiences is because you want to limit the amount of time that you are devoting to a traumatic or negative experience. At the end of the day, you want the committee member reviewing your application to feel excited to meet you, to feel like you are someone that's so resilient and impressive. And you don't want them to associate feeling sad when they are reading your statement. You don't want to elicit a range of negative emotions that make people feel uncomfortable, that make people pity the applicant, that make people doubt the applicant's ability. So there's a fine line in what you might want to share. And again, it's not a rule, and everyone is different, and every story is different, and every mentor has a different perspective. That's my perspective. And the best statements that I see, and the statements that I see are most successful, are statements that are powerful, compelling, but resilient. So finding that balance is unique to you. Generally, avoiding cliches or overused statements, right? If everyone, again, thinking about how your statement is going to compare to 200 other applications, almost everyone can say very cliche statements. I have dreamed about this. I have dreamed about helping people. I have always been really good at helping, at talking to people. Anything that you think is super generic and broad is not going to help your statement, and is actually going to make the committee member feel like, oh, you're just like everybody else, right? And that's not something that's going to help your application. You want to be able to use this opportunity to highlight that your perspective and your experience is unique, and you have a developed sense of confidence that you can bring to the table. Generally, you want to avoid any jargon that's field specific. This is oftentimes more relevant to your research statement, but in your personal statement, Sometimes you might mention specific programming, anytime you use acronyms, anytime that you are describing anything. You want to keep in mind that not everyone is familiar with everything. So you want to make sure that it is available and accessible for anyone reading your application that may not have your specific background or expertise. Informal writing, of course, and contractions are just not going to help the quality of your statement. You still want to have an academic, formal, personal statement, even though it feels like you are telling a story and you want to be conversational. It still is a formal academic statement. Additional tips is making sure that your statement communicates confidence, that it communicates your competence and your independence as a potential researcher, as a potential graduate student. You are applying to a program that is going to give you more independence than you currently have now. So you want to showcase that you have that level of maturity to be able to reflect on your past experiences, be able to understand your broad purpose, be able to communicate your ability to achieve your goals. And you can only do that by being super confident and really highlighting your successes, reframing everything to focus on what you've done and what you've achieved to get to where you are today. One way to do this is by using active language, right? So rather than saying, I was invited to conduct or I was given, so this was done, I conducted, I earned, I sought. It's more active and it places the focus on you as a subject, on you as the main character in that narrative, as opposed to you being handed things, as opposed to you doing what you are told. You want to really center yourself in that story. You want to become the main character in that story. Students are typically fearful that if they use more active language or if they take control of the experience, that it's going to make them seem not humble. You know, you're not giving credit to where credit is due. But oftentimes I see students that are there on the other end of the spectrum. So even if you think you're being super active and super confident in your language, oftentimes you're playing it safe a little bit, and you still have a long way to go. So if you are overstepping, your advisor will tell you, or people will tell you, or oftentimes you'll see that come through. But I would say generally students are more likely to be overly humble as opposed to overstepping. Keep in mind that you are selling yourself as an independent researcher. This is essentially a pitch. This is essentially you showcasing your strengths, showcasing your resilience, and your ability to be independent, and especially going into a PhD program to conduct research at the doctoral level is going to require a lot of independence, a lot of persistence, a lot of self-discipline, a lot of motivation, a lot of critical thinking, all those skills that you are expected as a doctoral student. They want to see that now. They want to see that now. They want to see that you are ready, that your transition is going to be very easy, and you're going to easily utilize those skills and adjust as soon as you get in, right? So you want to be able to communicate in a way that you would imagine a doctoral student is communicating as, so that you're basically doing it. That gives them more confidence that you will succeed because you're already doing these things that the student is doing in their lab. Some other tips are to tailor your draft to each institution. Include information that shows that you have done your homework, that shows you want to be in that program, not just in graduate school, not just in this discipline, not just in this research area. This specific program is the best fit for you. It takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of effort, and that's also why it gets recognized, because it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of effort. And a lot of folks don't have time to do that because it takes so much time identifying your narrative, finalizing your story, making it compelling, doing the modifications to make it more active, right? That takes a long time. So by the time students get to the very end, where they are tailoring for each institution, they often don't do it. They run out of time, and they don't do it for each program. So when they are reading your application and they see information that is specific to that program, to that department, to that university, to that population, they're like, oh, wow, this person has done their homework. We're not just a generic program that they're applying to because we do this, right? It communicates that that program is your top choice. So that's how you can also modify your statement so that it is unique, because a lot of folks don't do that. Some tips to get you through the writing process to get you started. I think especially during the application cycle, you want to have a writing schedule, or you want to have a schedule where you are working on your applications. You want to make consistent progress all the way up to the deadline, as opposed to working on it when you have time. Because this is going to give you practice, establishing momentum, establishing self-discipline for yourself. And these are the things that you will need to pull from when you are in that graduate program, right? You don't have to delay practicing a writing schedule until you get into a graduate program. You can do that now because it takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of effort, and you are going to benefit from having that consistency, having that self-discipline, being able to motivate yourself, especially through the discomfort of writing your personal statement. A lot of folks struggle with the personal statement because it's so personal, because you are being evaluated on your personal journey, because the story is not super clear, and because it takes a lot of self-reflection, it takes a lot of digging, it takes a lot of consideration. Why am I doing this? Right? Because you can't say you're doing this because your advisor said you should, you're doing this because it's going to set you up in the future. You have to really think and reflect. Why is this the next step for you? Why this program? Why this route? Why are you choosing to embark on this journey? How much do you know about what this graduate program is going to require, right? So it's challenging. So you have to find ways to build your own momentum so that you can push through the discomfort of sitting at your laptop and not knowing where to start. So these are some tips that can potentially help you get through so that you can build the rhythm. For example, doing a free write, setting a timer, writing freely, no editing, right? Kind of working through writer's block so that you get into the habit of just writing, brainstorming freely. If you set a writing schedule, you can either write at the same time every day or write for a certain amount of time every day, right? And that can look different for everybody depending on your other commitments, depending on where you are in your application process, depending on how much progress you want to make. You can set blocks, right? If you can do longer blocks, you can do shorter blocks, or you can do it Monday through Friday, whatever works for you. But as long as you are consistent, that makes it easier for you to jump back into it as opposed to leaving it and trying to work on it for 8 hours on one day before the deadline, right? It's the consistency that is going to help you frame the narrative, that is going to help you produce multiple drafts. The Pomodoro technique is also something that you can use to set this writing schedule. You can look it up, and it's basically you're setting time blocks shorter periods of interrupted time followed by a break so that you can focus for those 25 minutes, not scroll, not check email, and then you take a break, right? And then you come back into it. So that's really helpful so that you can make consistent progress. And then the uninterrupted time, super, super helpful when you are working on a writing schedule. So that's something that I do. And especially when I'm struggling to push through on certain writing tasks, the Pomodoro technique is really helpful because you know that it's only 25 minutes at a time, super doable. I cannot check email for 25 minutes, right? I cannot check my phone for 25 minutes. It's not the end of the world. And then you know that you're going to get a 5-minute break at the end. So that kind of helps relieve some of that tension. The SMART goals that you can use for a writing schedule can also be really helpful. SMART goals, if you've never used or heard of SMART goals, they are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic or relevant, and time-bound. You can make SMART goals for a writing session. You can also make SMART goals for a week or for longer periods of time, right? So depending on where you are, depending on what you want to do, you might have different SMART goals for different periods of time so that you can break down tasks that are more reasonable and you feel that you are making progress as opposed to trying to tackle everything all at once. An example of setting a SMART goal in terms of writing your statement can look like this. So for example, specific goals are clear and well-defined. If you set a timer for 2 hours, you're sitting down to write for 2 or 3 hours, or you're doing the Pomodoro technique for 2 or 3 hours with some breaks in between, you can set a specific goal to say, I'm going to write the introduction paragraph of my personal statement. It's specific, it's clear, this is my introduction paragraph. It should be measurable. That paragraph should be 250 words, right? How do you know whether you have written the introduction paragraph? Well, you can set a limit, 250 words, or you can add an additional 250 words to your statement so that you know that you have met the goal for that period of time. It should be achievable, it's realistic and attainable, right? You don't want to say, well, I'm going to write my entire draft in one day. That is not achievable. And even if you do write a draft, is that really going to be useful? Is that really going to, are you really going to keep everything in that draft, or are you just kind of brainstorming, right? So you want it to be achievable. Relevant or realistic, depending on how you want to define it. It's basically making sure that the goal and what you are working on is going to be useful. And then the time piece is super, super helpful. If you're setting a SMART goal for that writing session, this is, I'm going to write 250 words by the end of the day. I'm going to write 200 words in 3 hours. I'm going to have my first draft due by this day. You can set time-bound goals so that you have a specific goal that you are working towards. Finally, super, super important. I feel like everything I say is, or everything that I have said in this workshop has been super, super important. But one of the things that I do want you to take away from this process is that it is going to take multiple drafts and it is going to require a lot of revisions. The best stories have gone through many drafts. Most, I think on average, students tell me that they go through 10 to 15 drafts, full draft changes, so that they can get a ton of feedback. They change the story, they change the order, they provide more detail, less detail, they make this connection between the events. There are a lot of things that take shape over multiple drafts. So as you're working on your very first draft, keep in mind that this first draft does not have to be perfect, and this first draft does not have to include everything that you will submit to the application. The earlier you start, the more drafts you will have, and the more drafts you will have means that the stronger your statement is going to be. Okay? 100% of the time, the more iterations of that story, the better that story is, the more compelling that story is. I have never seen a statement that is a first or second draft. The statements that I find really, really compelling have gone through such drastic changes and oftentimes are completely different stories from what was told in the very beginning. So this is one draft. This is one version. This is you brainstorming. What are the things that I might talk about? What are the things that make up my story? Receiving feedback from multiple people is helpful because I have my own perspective on the many drafts that I've seen. I've seen so many statements from different disciplines, from people applying to different programs. Personal statements are almost always the same. It's a personal narrative. It is about resiliency. It is about you overcoming, you identifying your purpose. And I have a perspective and I have a preference, and other committee members have a preference, right? So I've seen many statements where I've provided feedback, and I've seen many statements as a committee member admitting students to the graduate program. So if you count the number of statements that I have seen, I think I can't even imagine. It's probably been over 300 or 400 at this point. So I have a preference on what I like when I see a statement, and other committee members, other people, other faculty advisors also have a preference. So getting feedback from multiple people, and then you ultimately will decide what feedback you will incorporate and how you want to tell your story, because at the end of the day, it's your story to tell. I know that receiving feedback is scary, especially when it is about personal experiences and your personal background, but it does get better with practice. And receiving feedback on your writing is a major component of grad school. So the faster you kind of get some practice and you kind of rip off the Band-Aid, the easier it is to send off your draft to get some feedback, because that is going to help improve your story. And if someone is giving you a lot of feedback, then that's a big, big deal for them. They're taking so much time out of their day to help you improve your story. So that's a big investment on their part. So it really changes the perspective when you see a draft come back and there's a ton of notes, a ton of track changes, a ton of revisions and suggestions and questions. It's like, wow, thank you for taking the time to really help me flush out this draft, as opposed to someone that's like, cool, looks good, maybe change this or this. It's like, not super helpful, right? You want to maximize the amount of feedback that you get, and that's usually by getting it from multiple people. And then finally, I have this resource, which is basically outlining a couple of the things that I've talked about in this video with a little bit more detail. It also includes some general tips for the structure and how you might want to organize some sections and some examples, and really helps you reframe and summarize some of the things that I've talked about in this video. So you can scan this link and see the multi-page resource that I have put together. And if you have any specific questions about your personal history statement, I'd be happy to chat and brainstorm what your specific story might look like, so that you can have the best application packet and submit an application that you are really proud of at the end of the cycle.